Welcome back to the show. Today we got Ray Schaub with us, the consciousness leader. He's going to really help us guide us in a path. His program, Mental Fitness for the Business Leader in Recovery. A lot of us are facing, have been through recovery, and to be a business leader and bring consciousness to it. Ray's got some amazing techniques, and I think you guys will all, in recovery or not in recovery, I think you all will benefit for the conversation we're about to have. So, Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Anthony.
When we look at leaders and you start working with people in recovery, right? I think there's some stuff that we can really start to unwind and unpack there, right? Let's kind of start with that and kind of get it. How that works.
Well, how did I come by it, or how?
Well, no, I'm going to say, look, I get how you came by, right? Look, there's some recovery in your past, and I can get that, but I really want to dive into why recovery. What's the difference between someone that's in recovery and someone that's not in recovery?
There you go. Great question. So firstly, whether someone is in recovery or not, someone can be actively in their addiction and know that they have a problem that they have to solve, and they can't get to it. They first, in order to get to it, would have to clear the decks, would have to clear their minds in such a way. So the first step of any 12-step program starts with the two words, we admitted. It doesn't mean we were diagnosed, we were told, we discovered, we found out. It means we admitted, means we knew that we had a problem.
Right. And I think most of us know, right? I mean, at least Correct. I did. I knew that before I got sober, there was a long period of time before that I kept trying. Now, the difficult part about recovery for me was that, the disease kind of cutting back like a powerful, and it kept talking me back. You're just, you're going through, just shape it up a little bit. You'll be fine.
Right. So in my view, the person who has not yet entered recovery needs to make that healing, that recovery, their primary focus of their lives in order to quell the chaos of their lives, in order to get over the cravings, get over the actual addiction, before they can focus on something like their business or even their marriage or the rest of their lives. First, they have to get control over their alcoholism and or addiction.
So let's kind of handle that real quick, because there's no other option, right? There's no, like, you could try to lessen what you're doing. You can try to, in other words, it's either all or nothing at this point, right?
Well, let's make a fine point here. There is such a thing as called harm reduction. Yeah. And I believe I engaged in that well before I entered full abstinence from alcohol. So I used to go on these forced abstinence binges myself, and I would say, no more for me. And I would make these promises and whatnot. And there's a beautiful book published by Alcoholics Anonymous called Alcoholics Anonymous, referred to as the Big Book within that program. And in one of its chapters, it's got a paragraph that lists all the things we did to try to stop. And it lists 18 items. And the very first time I read that chapter, I was in a room where we were reading it out loud, and it fell to me to read that paragraph. And I was stunned. I had done everything in the list. So we often start on a path of harm reduction. And, it's really important to note that, you can reduce harm, or you can effectively eliminate it. Eliminate what the drug or the alcohol's effect is on you by simply not partaking in it. It's a very simple premise. How much do you have to reduce by to gain enough harm reduction in your life? So I believe in harm reduction. I believe that it is a healthy step towards self-care and towards healing for people. But when I refer to full recovery, real recovery, I'm talking about full abstinence. And everyone will do that in their own time if it's the thing for them to do. So I'm not out here thumping that, it's the only way, it's the right way, it's any way. It's that it's a very simple premise that it's a very easy number to track, 0.
Right, right. And look, it's different for me than my wife. Right. My wife can go and, let's just say example, she's got this group of women that she loves, and I love them. We call them the bad moms, right? They're all, suburban housewives and have kids, and they get together and they drink wine and they just have a hell of a great time, right? They just laugh until I have to pick them up. Their bellies they're laughing so hard, and they've drank a lot of wine. And let's just imagine they have a tough morning the next day. Right. That's one kind of drinking that, I remember that kind of fun. But then there was the difference between her or we'd go out to dinner and she would have a cocktail and maybe a second cocktail and half of it would be left on the table.
Right.
Right. There was like that kind of drinking was different than my kind of drinking. My kind of drinking was the kind of drinking where I would say, I'm not going to do it. And I would do it. I would make these promises, or once I started, it usually, mine wasn't typically just alcohol. I went to drugs as well. Once I opened that door and I got into, my first couple of cocktails, then it was like, I'd like to do some other stuff. And that led itself to even more. So it was just a different way. And I think that's the thing to really see when we're talking about the person who that isn't just a one rough night out, maybe a night that's harmful, but becomes a habitual type of night out. The need to reduce may be a good way of testing yourself, but in order to really get to the next level without having complete abstinence, it seems like the efforts kick in, right? You're not willing to really do the work.
Correct. The efforts start to kick in. And for me, not only the efforts, but the false sense of a cure, So when I did my forced abstinence, when I did my harm reduction, self-guided harm reduction program, often at the end of whatever period I gave the alcohol up for, I had convinced myself that I wasn't an alcoholic because I was able to quit. Look at that. I quit for the weekend, or I quit. And at one point I quit for 1.5 years. Then when I finally surrendered, rather than quit, I surrendered, and I did step into a 12-step program. I noticed in the preamble to AA, when they were reading it one day, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And it suddenly dawned on me, what evidenced my alcoholism wasn't that I stopped, it's that I wanted to. A non-alcoholic doesn't want to quit drinking. It doesn't rise to their consciousness. It doesn't, they don't. My now ex-wife is a bona fide non-alcoholic. Just like she leaves half a drink on the table at the end of dinner. That just mystifies me. I often couldn't leave a table unless I'd finished everybody's drink, and I drained the pitcher dry that had just been ordered. So I was like a hollow leg, a bottomless pit of alcohol, and but she's also has never even considered the fact that, gee, maybe I should cut down. So in early sobriety, one time I turned to a friend of the family, he's a Catholic priest. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I quit drinking. I felt like I needed to slow that down and quit. But you know what? Kate hasn't." And he laughed. He understood the joke. Kate doesn't need to quit drinking. She's drinking a couple of glasses of wine a month, whether she needs it or not. So that's a key thing. So if anybody listening to us is dabbling with the idea of sobriety for themselves, I would say, how strong is that thought of wanting to quit? Because that's the strongest indicator of whether or not you have a problem.
Yeah. Now, so once you figure that out, look, I've got a problem. Like you said, I think we know, right? I think I know now to get to, am I willing to go through this next step of doing the work, right? I have to jump across this threshold, right? Admit that I have a problem and kind of this next little step becomes a little bit of an issue for a lot of us alcoholics.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, there's no firm advice on how to do that, how to take that step. It's your inner compass will tell you this is time. Even again, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about experimental drinking. If you don't think you have a problem, if you're not quite ready for this, go out and experiment with the drinking and see how well it goes. And don't come back here until you're convinced you need to do this, because it is very hard to dabble in sobriety. It's very hard to have a belly full of beer and a head full of recovery. It's just not fun in any regard.
And that next step, though, as much as I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? The next thing really became freeing, mm-hmm. right? The release of that saying, I remember the first time saying, I'm Anthony, I'm an alcoholic. There was like this, I got goosebumps remembering that feeling, right? The feeling of like, whew, right? Okay. All right. I got it. Now I get to be in here. Now, what's amazing about 12-step programs is the feeling of belonging to a group that wants to support you, right? The amount of overwhelming support in those groups. So it's kind of stepping over that boundary and opening that door. Now there was a willingness. And I think that's one of the really fun parts to get into. Right.
Exactly. I stepped into my first meeting ever, and it was a long story how I walked into that meeting, and I walked in as it was about 15 minutes before the end of the meeting. And it wasn't my first 12-step. I'd been in the Friends and Family program, Al-Anon, for a few months, which really helped me gain a lot of clarity on myself. And I sat in the chair, and the room was full of about 20 people or so. And the chairperson said, nobody else is speaking, so do you want to share? You just came in the room, do you want to share? And I started sobbing. I said, I'm Ray, I'm an alcoholic. And I had never spoken a more profound truth. My name, and I am an alcoholic. And the relief, as you just mentioned, was profound. I felt like steam was rising off my body, something that had been held in, erupted volcanically out of me. So it was such a profound relief. And for the next at least 90 days, my sole focus in life was on remaining abstinent from alcohol with the support of this group and recognizing the benefits that were coming to me. In years prior, I said, like one time I became abstinent from alcohol for about a year and a half. And all these wonderful things happened that I did not attribute to not drinking. Right. I didn't realize that my depression lifted. I met the woman I married. I founded a company. I did all these really wonderful things. And I thought it was just like, well, it was my due. It was just the timing of things. I never attributed it to being dry from alcohol. And then in my first 90 days in true recovery, it was exposed to me. No, these things happen because you've put down this drink and you've stopped poisoning not only your body, but your mind. And I want to say, alcohol is classified as a depressant. And it is it has a cumulative effect. So it doesn't matter if, like, some days I only had a couple of drinks and the weekend I had more or whatnot. It's the period of time in which I never let alcohol leave my body, completely leave my body, that it kept me in depression. It kept me in some, very strange decision making. It kept me in conflict in my relationships, not only in my marital relationship, but my business relationships. One colleague at a conference we were at, I can't remember what I was on about, but he suddenly turned around. He said, "Could you cool it? You're driving me nuts." And I thought, Me? Moi?
No way.
How could I be doing this?
I mean, like even the, for those of you that are not drinkers, that are drug users, look, for me, it's the same thing, right? I interchange both those conversations as whatever goes in my mouth that makes me not feel right. It can be any substance from physical sobriety. It really can be any substance that I put in. And by the way, I did lots of stuff that doctors gave me. I'm not an addict. But I'd walk in a doctor's office and get a handful of Adderall, and oh my God, I was at a party and someone gave me an Adderall. I'm like, oh, this stuff is amazing. I could talk and whatnot. And he goes, how do you get this stuff? He goes, well, walk in your doctor's office and say this. And I went into the doctor's office. I said that, and 15 minutes later, I had a prescription for a class 1 narcotic. And I'm like, this is amazing. Right. And, so whatever it was for me that got me to that place of disconnection, I really, when, sometimes people will judge, well, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not, to me, whatever, once it goes past my lips, my body doesn't care. Right. Mm-hmm. It's really just a matter of disconnecting. So, that feeling of disconnection and then starting to feel again was was the thing. I had gone years essentially without feeling, pure. I mean, every day there was some residual in my body that was disconnecting me from the world. So whatever that is for you, that's causing that, that might be a good conversation to look at. Right. So, I was just noticing as you were talking, I changed, right? I went from drinking to this drug, to prescription drugs, to, smoking pot. And, they're all the same once they get in, but, I felt that sense of disconnect there. So, all right. So now we get to the point where we understand that we need to start abstinence, and however that journey is for you, you'll get there. And now what's the gift in the abstinence?
There you go. So it's a perfect segue. So my course, Mental Fitness for Business Leaders in Recovery. So we get to the recovery aspect now. And as you just said, you changed. So I work with people who've gone through that change, and you have opened yourself up to introspection. You have opened yourself up to the truth, and you became a truth seeker in many ways. You look much more holistically and clearly at the world around you. You have a supportive environment in many cases that you never had before. You have intimacy to a degree you never had before with people. If you're anything like me, you were suddenly exposing yourself emotionally to men in a way you never did to your wife, and, these are, you are a new person. You are different in the world. So this is why my course is focused on those in recovery, because I use a common language from recovery. I use common modalities from recovery when I'm doing the work with my clients and my students. And, it's you're in a different mindset. Anyone who has sat in a 12-step meeting has probably heard, an openness, an honesty, an unvarnished truth, a willing to share things in such a stark reality that they had never heard before. So that tone of voice occurs in my classes. And we have a safe environment in which people can process the work we're doing and tell the stories they tell. That once we kept those stories hidden under a rock, we would have never exposed them to anybody. Now we're telling them in some cases with laughter, going, oh my God, the insane thing that I did when this happened. And it means that the truth is no longer unsafe for us. We have made a safe place for the truth, and we have created a soft place to land for ourselves. So those are very important distinctions about working with people who are in active recovery and people who are approaching it and people who aren't in it at all.
So let's kind of go through that process a little bit, so I think it's kind of important. So you get through the physical sobriety, right? I'm not taking the drugs, alcohols, and substances that are going in my mouth. Now the next portion becomes, there's a sequencing of events you get to, emotional sobriety,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Emotional sobriety really is about accepting your feelings as they are. One of my dear friends has a line. He goes, when I first entered recovery, I started feeling better. I felt anger better. I felt resentment better. I felt depression better.
That's right. 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 No, right. Right. I mean, look, literally, I'm feeling all these things. One of the reasons why I did drugs and alcohol was I would venture to tell you, I was really uncomfortable as a human. And that first drug I took really was that, that was easy. That feeling of just, that real relief. And, at first it was like this great space to be in where I felt relief. But as I faced life, from there, not feeling at all wasn't very useful.
Right. Right. If you were taking a first drink of the day, for instance, maybe, at 5 or 6 o'clock, you'd white knuckle it till 5 o'clock, in some cases, maybe till noon on the weekends. And when you had that drink, you likely felt that relief for no more than like 10 to 20 minutes, about 10 to 15 minutes after you took it. But then you spent the rest of the day, the rest of the evening chasing that feeling, which never came back. So that's the nature of the addiction. And what we were chasing was that sort of euphoric feeling of, all is right with the world. And we only got it for this little glimpse, So yes, absolutely. The motivation to drink for me was to numb those feelings out that I couldn't deal with when I was clean. And when the alcohol had lowered in my system to a certain point, that the feelings started coming back, and then I'd say, I got to top this off. And those feelings were resentment, anger, regret, shame, remorse. These are the dark horses that gallop through our mind, and it's one of the very first things one learns in early recovery is how to sit with our feelings and allow them to be. So I had walked into an AA meeting one day, and I want to say I'm not a spokesman for AA, and I do know many, many people who've remained abstinent from alcohol without AA, but it's a big part of my story, so it infiltrates the story every now and then. But I walked into an AA meeting as a few weeks sober, and an old timer, this wonderful, wizened woman, said, "How are you doing today?" And I said, "Well, I feel all this guilt and remorse and shame for a lot of the things." She goes, "Sit with it. It's not going to kill you."
I didn't know that either, but you didn't know that, right? I mean, feel it like no one ever pulled me aside and told me that being uncomfortable was okay.
Right.
In fact, I would say just the opposite. I mean, everything in my life my mother, when I was hungry, would stick a breast in my mouth. At any place I was uncomfortable, I did anything to not be uncomfortable, right? Anytime I kind of had a lifestyle of never feeling uncomfortable. And, there was no, well, here's what happens when you feel uncomfortable. There was no practice to deal with uncomfortable feelings. In fact, I would try to avoid it with everything I had.
Right. And, to that point, many, many people in recovery, for me, 99% of people in recovery are there. The underlying issue is a trauma that triggered the addiction or the alcoholism. And for many, many people, that trauma occurred even in early childhood, when their needs weren't met, when they were hungry and weren't fed, when they weren't in safe households. Emotions weren't a safe thing in my household. Crying for the things children cry about, a hand would be raised to me and say, keep it up and I'll give you something to cry about. It's a really common thing. That's traumatizing for a small child. That's their universe. That's someone who's brought them into this world, seems not to want to protect them when they're in it. And so that can easily lead into situations where you want to drown those feelings that come up. And one of the prime things in early recovery is not only learning how to deal with feelings, but learning how to deal with memories. And not allowing those memories to consume us and to be gasoline on the fire of our emotions. These are all things that are happening in the mind that when we were drinking, we were evoking out into the environment, the world around us. And in recovery, we learn that we can sit with them without having them affect the world around us. And as we learn to do that, our control, our acceptance of them can actually reduce them quite significantly.
Well, I mean, for me, those re-feelings or resentments, right? To re-feel, to feel, right? Those resentments, those places where, one of my biggest one was I was resentful for being poor, right? Like I hated being poor. Right. It was like, I remember being on the playground and feeling kids making fun of the holes in my pants. Right. I went to some rich kids school and they all had fancy pants and my mother was too poor to give me those. And that trauma of literally that trauma of feeling awkward, like those kids making fun of me was something that I would feel. And what's funny about my brain is it refills it, but every time it refills it or revisits it, it gets a little bit worse.
Right.
I get a little, my brain doesn't try to fix it. It makes it worse. Like, I'll show them. If I was back there, I would have said this, it like chews on it in almost like a vicious way, that refeeling of it. It's almost like I'm still there. Right. And then you can kind of see from there in life where I am trying to prove I'm not poor. Really, I mean, that perpetuates most of my existence. Even today in recovery, I can still see those moments where that refeeling of that space will pop up. Right. And I think a lot of us will find those, and there's a lot of that. You can go back and find those trauma spaces, where sexually I was, whatever those are that you're comfortable talking about. But I think that's the process that you start to go through in the next part of sobriety, like really into why the 12-step program works. There's kind of a series of steps they start walking through that brings a lot of these things to the surface.
And I'm listening to the clarity in your voice as you're recounting that. And was that clarity there when you were using?
No, I didn't even, wasn't even aware of it. I mean, Ray, that's the funny part, was there was no conscious understanding that there was something in my body causing. No, it was completely, that had nothing to do with it.
Right. Exactly. And imagine the context in which you would have shared these things with somebody. It would have been at a bar. It would have been profanity laced. And, you would have been, flaming, whoever you were talking about. And then you would have been saying, well, what does it matter? Who cares? Let's get another round. And, none of that would have, would have helped cope with the issue, the underlying issue at all. And here you are in this really resolute, clear, healing space, talking about it openly without fear. I don't see an ounce of fear on your face or in your voice as you're recounting this in this moment. And that's recovery. That's the healing. That's the resentment of, the refeeling, as you just said, of healthy feelings. We can refeel those as much as we refeel the bad ones as well. But we have to strip the chemicals out of our system because they fuel all those darker feelings in there.
It left me, one of the conversations, listen, my mother worked at Denny's, right? And we were poor. And I was resentful about that. Like, all these other rich kids would be there. So, so slowly I get in recovery, and one of the gifts of doing a kind of analysis of my life and really looking at doing, really kind of deep diving into that thought, right? That refeeling was, I got to reframe it, right? There was a place where instead of it being resentful, I actually created some pride around it. This little woman who barely spoke English, who had nothing to, it was really scared and afraid and dumped into this country alone. She worked her ass off to support 2 kids, and she worked tirelessly night and day for us to survive. Right. And what becomes the thing that I was resentful about becomes the wind under my wings, and I start to really look at and go, wow, when I get to reframe that thought, right, that becomes something becomes really powerful that, now fuels my fire every day.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And really it's a wonderful segue into the next idea I want to present is about that reframing you said. So that's a lot of the work I do with people. So the type of work I do is called mental fitness. And it's exercises that are similar to working with a physical trainer in a gym. So the way you would walk into a gym and the trainer would give you light weights and have you do a few reps to get started, and he'd try to make it fun for you and start to build a daily or consistent habit for you of exercise. A similar thing happens in mental fitness, where we start with incrementally small durations and work our way up. And we explore different ways of quieting and focusing the mind. And over time, we learn skills like how to reframe old memories, how to reframe situations and our past in a certain way. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I like to work with the recovery community, because they're already on a path to doing that. Simply by admitting they were powerless over alcohol, they've automatically reframed right there, or powerless over narcotics. They've automatically reframed right there. So they have an experience, a felt experience of the liberation of what happens when we reframe. It's not denying their old story. It's not absolving perpetrators in their lives. It's reframing that story so that we can cope today in today's world doing what we have to do now.
Right. And there's a lot to, I think starting that reframe, we have to kind of figure out the stories, right? Because there's a bunch of them. And I oftentimes got to go through and, kind of check out the stories, right? And sometimes I feel like there's vomit there, like, blah, 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 this story, if you would have grown up in my neighborhood, blah, 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 and that group, right? And there was this whole list of stories that I didn't even know that I had, right? And it took a minute to get those figured out. Like, if you're gonna reframe them, first I had to know what the stories were, right? And they're literally on every subject of my life, right? From the way that I eat, the way that I drive, the way that I drank, the way that I lived, the way that I talked, right? There was a bunch of those that I needed to identify. And that took a little bit of work, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I used to refer to those stories as my DVD collection. Right. If I was calm in a moment, I'd say, what am I, I need to look at these. Let me take that one off plug that into the internal DVD. And it was like, oh my God, it felt like, I was opening a vein and so yes. And, that story, I can chew on that one for a while. And in early recovery, I used to hold people hostage in conversations, just recounting all of the things that had been wrongs that had been done me. And, if you had my experience too. And you know what? People were so unbelievably kind to me about it. They all understood. They had all been there, and they knew that I needed to be heard. So they heard me first. Nobody told me, you got to get over that. You got to do. They knew that the more I talked, the more I'd be relieved. As long as I didn't pick up a drink or a drug, I would be relieved of these things. They would vent out, and that pressure would be lessened to say it. And today I can. It's rare that certain stories come out. They don't have to anymore. I don't feel like you have to know these stories to understand me. You can experience me right here, right now, and know me even better.
It's funny how you start to see that And I don't want those that are, new to this conversation to go, all right, what's this gobbledygook they're talking about? But just look, the idea is that a lot of that story stuff was who I was and who I was defending, right? The little Tony on the playground, defending, I'm not poor, I'm not good enough, right? All of that really created thoughts, actions, and behaviors that ruled my life up until that moment, right? Until I identified them, right? There were thoughts, actions, or behaviors that were causing the way that I was living in the moment today. I mean, these stories happened, 30, 40 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago. And they were ruling my life in the present moment. And that was something I didn't understand yet. But as I started doing the work, and you go through and you start to reframe these stories, right? And start going, all right, how is that thought, action, behavior causing what's happening in my life today? Oh, look at you. You act this way, right? And there were some behaviors that I was having, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. So noticing that those stories are ruling today's lived experience.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, you mentioned flashbacks earlier, remembering old incidences. And so a traumatized person, somebody who's suffering from PTSD, who may or may not know it, post-traumatic stress disorder. There are, in my experience, what I've learned, there are two types of flashbacks. And one is a full flashback and the other is a partial flashback. And the full flashback is what you see in the movies when a car backfires and, a war veteran dives to the ground and relives the entire experience over again, as though it's happening in that moment. The entire thing is happening. And a partial flashback was the only where you'll have a reminder experience. A reminder will come in and you'll only feel the emotions from that past experience, but you'll attribute them to this new and changed event that's in front of you. And you'll attribute them to, so an example I give all the time is your boss saying, hey, can you step in here? I'd like to talk to you. And the flashback of a parent saying, get into my room, where they're going to take a belt off and take it to you. All of that wells up and you attribute it to that. My boss is a scary person. Not that my parent was a scary person or that caregiver was a scary person. This boss is my scary person now, and you will react to them as though they're. And people may have had these experiences. Like you walk in, the boss can see you're upset. You go, no, it's okay, it's okay. You don't have to be so worried. I can see it on your face that you think you're about to be fired, reprimanded, demoted, whatever. Have your pay docked. Whatever is happening, and he might sit down and say, "Listen, I'd like to give you a promotion," or I have a friend who has a lovely story about that. She got called into the office, and there are several people in there, and she panicked, and she goes, "I know why you want. You found that I'm using the copier for my other freelance work." And they go, no, that's not it. Oh, you found out that I've been doing this other thing that was, no, that wasn't it. She confessed to like 3 or 4 things. And they said, she was a freelancer there. They said, we want to hire you permanently.
Right. And it's exactly, it's exactly that space where, those traumas present in the now moment and create these actions that you are like, you're all of a sudden, it's crazy.
Right. So that's a lot of the work I do with people, is to help change them from what we call that negative reactive mindset, that instant, like things are going wrong, over to a positive responsive mindset. Yeah. And the work I do with people is we help insert a wedge between that reactivity that comes out of our amygdala into being able to analyze what's going on in the prefrontal cortex. This is all very science-based stuff. But for many addicts and alcoholics, their prefrontal cortex started, the development of it diminished when they started using. It started, it maybe not have arrested completely, but it slowed down. Yeah. So this prefrontal cortex is what analyzes the stories that come out of our our amygdala about what's going on. And we assess and we determine what's the best course of action. So if that's not very well developed and you're under the influence of something, your best course of action might be to swing your fist.
That's right.
You know?
Right. And some of that took, once I start to identify that I'm carrying this story that's affecting my actions today, right? Now I can really start to see that, right? As if I've got to kind of looking through life through this pair of story lenses, right? I'm adding that story of my past onto the now experience. So now I get to the point where we notice that and you start to identify the stories that they're carrying that are affecting the now experience. And how do you start to make those shifts? How do you start to do the work that says, all right, I'm going to start working on those behaviors?
Well, 12-step programs started by doing things like the 4th step and the 5th step, where you're getting this out. You're getting it on paper in many cases. And then in their later steps, like 10 and 11, they're talking about the 10th step is what you continue to take this personal inventory. And if you're wrong, you promptly admit it. That's exactly how the statement reads. So you're really into examining things for how they are. Rather than layering your story over things, putting your imprimatur on it, if you will. So that's one way it starts. And people working in therapy might deal with things like reframing. Cognitive behavioral therapy will do that. I'm a big believer in that. And in some cases, I'm a proponent, when it's guided by a qualified professional, psychopharmacology can help quell some of the chemistry in the brain that tells those stories, that magnify those stories. So all of these modalities are valid and can be worked together with a program like what I teach, which is based in something called positive intelligence. And that's this new program that was developed by Shirzad Chamine a few years ago. And it takes modern science and it uses that modern science to teach us ancient wisdom about living in this present moment. But part of the modern science is exactly what you're asking, is how do we then change that story? How do we then quell that? Well, they've determined that in that reptilian part of our brain, that amygdala, we have a certain reactivity that comes out of that can be classified into about 9 or 10 categories. And the top one, the umbrella one, they call it the judge. We're judging circumstances harshly or negatively. We're judging ourselves. We're judging others. We're judging what's going on in our lives negatively. And therefore, we are going to have a negative response to it. But then it breaks it down into these other sort of archetypes that they've proven that everybody has to some degree. Even the Dalai Lama has these to some degree. But they are labeled things like the victim, the hyperachiever, the pleaser. These are standard modalities in which we tend to react from. It's not a label of who we are. It's not a personality label. It is simply saying that by the causes and conditions of your life, this is how you tend to respond. Now, the amygdala is there in order to respond negatively. It's built to protect us. Yeah. It's the animal on the Serengeti, the gazelle grazing, and suddenly senses a lion approaching, and bam, he's off. And heart rate, the body is flooded with chemicals. It's necessary.
Ray, I wake up with my amygdala every morning. It's looking for a dinosaur somewhere. I wake up I don't know. I call him Fred. I mean, you can call it the amygdala, but I wake up to Fred every morning. He's, all right, where's the dinosaurs? Where are they? Where they're coming at me. It's funny how, look, it's there for protection, right? Yeah. But I think sometimes some of us, it gets a little overgrown.
Bingo. In humans, it gets overgrown. It's humans. We're the only ones with this structure of the brain that has this, prefrontal cortex up there. I don't know that for a scientific fact. I just know that we're the only ones who obsess in this way. I don't, and who am I to say? Maybe the dolphins do too. Maybe other primates do.
You think they get up every morning going, what about that fish? What about this fish? Oh, okay, I can't believe that dolphin did that to me today. I can't believe that.
That's exactly where I go with this example with the gazelle, because when the gazelle gets far enough away and suddenly senses the danger is no longer imminent, these animals shake it off and they go back to eating. And they resume where they pick up where they left off. What do humans do? Exactly what you're describing. Is that a lion? Is that a lion? Is that a lion? Oh, that lion, man, I hate that lion. That lion's always sneaking up on me, One of these days I'm going to get that lion, And that's where we get like a hamster on a wheel that won't stop. So the techniques that are provided for within positive intelligence are there with the intention of quelling that reactivity, so that you can come down to a more manageable level. And then you've got space to analyze whether or not the threat is real. So going back to that boss calling you into the office, we give you techniques that might say, take 3 conscious breaths first.
Yeah. I sometimes want to write that on the inside of my eyelids.
You're right.
Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. And you'll realize you don't know what's going to happen in that office. And it has just as good a chance as being positive as it does of being negative. And there's no reason to respond to it until you're dealing with fact, not with conjecture in your mind. So does that make sense? And
listen, I just got done taking my test to become a pilot. I failed it the first time, right? I failed it the first time and I had to go back and study. I missed it by 1 question.
Oh, wow.
And I was so bummed. How could I mean, the whole time I was studying, I'm like, maybe you're too old. You're never going to do this. But what are you thinking? Maybe this is God's way of telling you you shouldn't be flying. Look, the brain made up you're too old to take a test like this. And even while I was taking the test, I wanted to walk out of the room. I was like, all right, I can't believe I don't feel like I know this. And I studied my bottom off for that, right? I really did. I really got into all the deep dive into understanding all the things I was kind of just on the surface level knowing. I really knew the information, but I'm sitting there taking the test and my brain is telling me, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. You're going to fail. That amygdala, whatever that is, you're going to fail. And it really was unkind. And I kept just answer the next question properly. Right. And I would just take the next question. But I just noticed that I had this huge amount of fear. When I walked through that desk and she said, you passed, I cried in the room. Like I just broke down and cried. I was like, wow. And there was, but it was not kind during the process. Now, I don't know that everybody goes through that the way that the alcoholic brain does. Mm-hmm. You're right. There was that one inside of me that just really was not kind. Fred, I call him Fred, and Fred was really mean to me. And, during that period, but I had done the work and I kept saying, you know this work, you know this material, you've gone through this, stop. Oh, but these questions they ask, oh my God, I can't believe the way they ask the questions. The brain, that reptilian part of my brain, that amygdala part of my brain was, I don't know, trying to protect me, I guess.
Right. Well, that's it. Some people believe they hang on to these thoughts because they think in some ways it's leading to their success. They don't realize that they're inhibiting. They don't realize that they will be that much more successful without it. They think if they're not so, I was treated for trauma as an adult that related back to childhood. And my father used to have a saying. He was a pretty humble guy from Indiana. And he would say, well, stop worrying about the mule going blind. Just keep loading the cart. And whenever I would say, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Well, that's called hypervigilance. That's a symptom of trauma. Constantly scanning the horizon for trouble. But one day he asked me, at the time I was a film producer. I was producing independent films and music videos and things like that. And he's going, well, why? How does your job work? What do you do? And I said, well, let me put it to you this way, Dad. I not only have to worry about the mule going blind, but I have to make sure I have another mule that looks exactly like the first mule in case that mule goes lame, because I've got a team full of Teamsters,
Right.
standing around, and I've got to put the second mule in right away. So that's what makes me good at what I do. And so all of these effects, these symptoms that we have, and even these, what positive intelligence refers to as our saboteurs, do have start out as positive things in our lives. They do spur us on to be better at some of the things we do. It's just what you said earlier. It's when it gets out of control and it's ruling our lives rather than enhancing our lives. So with me, where that was a valuable asset to have as a producer, it wasn't a valuable asset to have as a husband or as a father. I had to quell those things of looking for the trouble on the horizon because it just wasn't there, and there wouldn't be. I wouldn't need to respond it till it actually arrived.
Now, that response that I was going through, I'm sitting there feeling that feeling of sitting there. Like, school wasn't really kind to me. I didn't do such a great job at school. I felt, learning the way I didn't learn the way other kids did. I had to go sit in that special room. I had to write with a big fat pencil. My teacher would pull me aside and I'd have special classes. But I love learning. Like, I love to learn. I think one of the reasons why I do the podcast is I just love meeting people that do great things. And I love the ideas that are presented. I love reading books. But the way education system came caused lots of trauma for me, right? That feeling of being less than. The same thing happened with religion, right? I never felt good enough, right? So some of these were like these traumas that you can hear. As I was sitting there talking about that test taking, like, it bring me right back to that classroom with a big fat pencil, feeling awkward, right? That one inside of me that goes right back to that trauma, even though I know, right? I know that there's no dinosaurs going to eat me. I've studied hard for this test, but that trauma brings it right back to the moment.
Right. Exactly. And again, that's why I really like to work with, the business leaders in recovery in that regard, because what you're describing is very common to people who've got even 6 months to decades of abstinence from alcohol. They still have that reaction. So a CEO gets that reaction when he walks into the boardroom, and he's in the board meeting. I remember watching a CEO when I was an employee for somebody, and I was working in the HR department, and we were unfolding survey results. And this person literally started to go into a cold sweat. He was just afraid to see what those results were going to say about being employed at his company. So this can impact people in a number of ways. And as I said, other modalities like 12-step or therapy or psychopharmacology are all very valid and contribute to helping with these things. But what none of them do is actually enhance skill sets. So where a therapist might say in a CBT environment, in a cognitive behavioral therapy setting, say, you need to reframe some of these things so that you're not obsessed about their negative impacts on you. What positive intelligence does is help you reframe them every day, guided through an app and a coach, and even hourly, every few hours, an exercise to help you do that reframing, so that it's not just you left to your own devices after you leave the therapist or psychiatrist's office. It's there every step of the way. And it's amazing. I designed this because I knew probably at least half a dozen business leaders who had decades of recovery who were still telling me about these deep, profound anxieties that were plaguing them. And I said, well, there's one extra little dose of something we can add into that'll augment the others. Suddenly, the people who've gone through it with me go back and says, this is making my therapy work that much more effective. In one particular case, somebody was able to reduce their meds. I don't recommend that without the psychiatrist's involvement.
Right.
But they said, "Hey, yeah, he's able to reduce my dose
Well,
because I'm."
I think this is what's fun about where we're at. So, look, the Ray, the work that you do, and I think that's why the work that you do is really beneficial. When you work with people that are in recovery, they're already in the modality. Hey, I want to do better, right? Even though I know that every day I'm not perfect, right? There are days when in recovery where I argue with my wife or something with my kids or something, but I get up the next day and I want to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's one of the gifts of working with people that are in good, solid recovery programs is that, their want is to continue to grow. And the same thing that happens as a leader, right? When you start to realize that even, all those things that made you feel happier in recovery, now I can do the same work, the same behaviors in my business life that will now, 1 or 2 or 10 or 20x my business life, through these actions. Right. I think that's a gift about having a coach like you that has a process to take them through.
Right. Exactly. No, it's really relevant. So again, going back, if someone is in a 12-step program, there's this one really powerful step called the 10th step, which is, we continue to take personal inventory. And when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. A lot of CEOs, a lot of business leaders aren't in that mode. It's their way or the highway. And they feel like if they show any weakness, if they give up any ground, they'll be seen as an imposter. People won't follow them anymore, and it is so truly antithetical to growth. And so again, I've got a friend who is a very high-ranking executive at one of the big firms in the nation. And he was a hard-charging, he called himself a bull in a china shop. And that's why he got hired. And then in recovery, and people were bailing on him. He couldn't keep like assistants, an executive assistant employed for more than a year at a time. And he thought it was all them lacking vision. Then after sobriety, about 90 days in, he said, somebody came to me with an issue, and he was suddenly this empathetic being that nobody had seen before. He said, "I'm really sorry you're going through that. Is there any way that I can help?" And that person has been his executive assistant now for like more than a decade.
That's awesome.
He just became these are the skills one can build if they're willing. Exactly what you just said. It's that willingness to change and that eagerness to change in many cases.
Yeah.
So,
which I think, what's fun about the alcoholic is I often believe that alcoholics have this amazing strength, right? This amazing, I call it a sword they don't know how to wield, right?
mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, in early life, it's overwhelming, and you get to the drink or the drug, and that easy feeling comes, and they're powerful people that often are in a tough world. Look, the school for me was a great example. Like school, I'm this creative being that I go to school and I just feel so I didn't belong there. I felt awkward. The way the schools and cliques and the way it operated was so uncomfortable. Right. And I get to drinking and right. And now, in sobriety, the people I get to work with and the being that I get to be dramatically change. You can almost see that 8 years ago when I find recovery, the group of people that started with me, I owned the company at that point, but for 20 years, right? You can almost see that the group of people that found me in that recovery point forward, most of them are, there's some real long-term people here.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, you look over my shoulder and there was a lot of dead bodies on the field. We fought a lot of battles, but
Right.
There was a lot of people just, there wasn't that same empathy, that creator, that the one that is in you that makes teams work, that has those micro sensitivities to what's going on with human beings, right? There's a way, as an intuitive being that can bring billions and billions and billions of ideas to any problem that's happening, right? That spiritual one of us that has connected to all those answers you really ever need,
Right.
that get opened up by that feeling. So, Ray, I love the work that you do on this. as we look at folks that are out there that are really interested in finding a coach like you, what's the best way for them to figure it out and look, try it out? I mean, to take that step over the bounds to trying this out.
Well, one way is you can reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, and an introduction to me just starts with a conversation, not unlike what we just had. There's really no sales pitch. It's two people getting to know each other. And particularly if you are in recovery, which you don't have to be, I'm happy to work with anyone. I believe that the recovery aspect brings a lot to the table. But reach out to me on LinkedIn is one place that I like to connect with people, and you can also learn more about me on there. And we start a conversation. For a practical tip today, if a lot of what we're saying resonates with you, I invite you to start with 60 silent seconds. So one of the ways that I got started in all of this work was I was in a crazy making job. And at the top of every hour, I would set my phone to ring to remind me just to pause for 60 seconds. And I wasn't doing anything in that pause. I wasn't trying to meditate or focus on my breathing. It was just to be silent. And that felt so good, I extended it to about 3 minutes. And at a certain point, when that felt so good, I decided when I came out of the 3 minutes, I would move in slow motion. Just move in slow motion. And I would take something out of the inbox, or I'd put my hand on the keyboards and just start typing to, look at email. And then very, very methodically, well, this crazy making chaotic job, suddenly my inbox was empty. My desk was clean. I was leaving the office on time at the end of the day without anything in my hands. And at the end of that year, I was paid over 110% of my bonus.
Right? It's amazing what happens. And look, that's the gift. Year 2 of my recovery, I had made more money in year 2 than I did the 10 years prior to that combined. In my second year, right? Like the things that open up and possibilities that open up. And I'm not saying it's about money. Look, forget the happiness, the life, all the rest of the stuff that's in there. But truth is, money happens too. So there's nothing wrong with making some money when you find that. And I think that's where you're heading is that it unlocks some financial opportunities as well.
Yeah, it increases our performance. And you said something earlier too. Working with teams, that when you're working in a team and you are an empathetic contributor to the team rather than a bullying driver to the team will generally be that much more productive. When you're able to see mistakes for just being mistakes and not failures, not abject failures, and recognize that you always, every moment of the day, have an opportunity to course correct after that mistake. There are no such things as, life ending or career ending or whatnot mistakes. Yes, it might look like that on the surface, but it's really just a course correction. And when you start recognizing that, you're back on your feet much faster and back into a productive mode much faster.
I'll put all the contact stuff down below. I love this conversation. It feels like it's so in tune with where we are societally right now. And Ray, you're a gift. You're a light. You're just a wonderful presence. I feel like I'm tuned in, like just being part of this podcast today. It feels like I'm tuned in to some good stuff for the day. And audience, I'm hoping you're feeling the same way I am right now. Ray, it's just such a gift having you on.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I'm so glad to have been here. Thank you so much.
We'll have you on again for sure. And we'll put all that down below. Audience members, if you could take a second and like and subscribe and give me any comments, anything you want to say to Ray, put that down below. Look, I challenge you to put anything you want down there, and we will make sure that Ray and I will comment on that. And as always, we're grateful for you listeners. And if you can take a second and I just hit that like and subscribe button just so that our people in the background know the work that they do to get great people like Ray on the podcast. It really does make a difference. So thank you for that.